Good afternoon or good evening, I guess, Maine. This is Chuck Ellis on the Muddy Waters podcast, and we're doing a little bit of a special edition just with some of the things that are going on, especially having to do with Laurel Libby and her fight against Ryan Fecteau. It's just been a really interesting time, and I thought, given that I don't have a legal background, I would, put out this special episode to help the people of Maine better understand what's going on in this situation, how unprecedented it is, and what the heck is going on ultimately with how they the specifically related to the judges, the district judges that are here in the state of Maine, having decided to recuse themselves and sending this case of Laurel pushing back against House Speaker Ryan Fecteau. This is now going to I guess, Rhode Island, I believe, and base it to a judge who claims not to have been a Marxist, though made some comments in the past about her Marxist phase. So that's a really interesting part of the story. But basically, just because I'm not an expert in law, I wanted to have somebody come on to be able to help us understand better what's going on in this situation. So today we have with us again Bobby Charles. So Bobby, thanks for coming on.
Chuck, I think you might be on the beginning end of a viral video here, so let's hope so.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, so obviously, like, this story just keeps getting weirder, and the Democrats keep backing themselves further and further into a corner. And part of me wonders if they don't have a choice because of how vehement they are about where they stand on this particular issue. But as this continues to unravel, again, I don't have a legal background, and a lot of people don't, and so I was hoping you could help us understand, what are the merits of her case. Again, when I look at the idea of somebody who's been elected by people to be their representative, and then being had their right to vote on behalf of their constituents taken away for something that feels like a bipartisan misrepresentation of a rule, seems like nefarious in and of itself. But now when she's opposing it, now we have like these judges. So if you could walk us through what in the world is going on from a legal perspective.
Yeah, so let's just unpack what's going on here. It boils down to the fact that I am a bit stunned that the Democrats continue to fumble the ball and then pick it up and then fumble it again and pick it up and fumble it again. The case that the constituents of Laurel Libby and Laurel Libby are bringing is a case that is, let me put it this way, because of being foreclosed from speaking indefinitely on the main House floor, which is quite a departure from the normal way that any speech is sanctioned. In the U.S. Congress, you can be sanctioned for one day. And there's no need for an apology the next day when the sun rises. In this case, they've sanctioned her indefinitely, which certainly raises First Amendment questions about whether you have a right to free speech on the floor of either chamber. But it's a bigger issue than that. The lawsuit that has just been filed really articulates four claims, and one is based on free speech, one is based on equal protection. The third one is based on due process, and the last one is based on the right. It's actually a guarantee in Article 4, Section 4 of the U.S. Constitution that we will have Republican government, little r, as in representative government at the state level. So let's go back to each one of those claims. Count one. Now, let me add one last thing here. Those are constitutional rights, but in both the federal law and in state law, and this is filed in federal court, there is something called 42 USC 1983, and lawyers sort of bandy it about and call it a 1983 action. A 1983 action is a statute that says that if a state official or a municipal official violates your constitutional rights, you have a cause of action against them under that statute. And then the question becomes, if you win, what is the relief you get? And you can either get damages, although there's an exception to that because there's something called qualified immunity. If a state official is only acting in their capacity as a state official, you can't get damages. However, you can still get injunctive relief. Now, what does that mean? It means that you can tell those people to stop doing what they're doing. Okay, so what Representative Libby and her constituents have done is they have used this statute, this federal statute, 42 USC 1983, and you can go look it up. And they have said, look, we have four rights that were violated. The first is my right to free speech. Interestingly, I read the briefs, and this right to free speech is pretty well established. They did not include, incidentally, in their legal brief, a case called Bond v. Floyd, which is a 1966 Supreme Court case that says legislators in particular have a First Amendment right that should not be abridged. So that's count number one. Count number two is equal protection. What is that? Well, in our Fifth Amendment, one of those first 10 that's in the Bill of Rights, everybody is guaranteed equal protection. They put the 14th Amendment in after the Civil War to say not only are you guaranteed equal protection as an individual, as a citizen, against the federal government treating you differently, but also against state governments treating you differently. So they are treating her differently. So there's an equal protection claim. The third one is a due process claim, which is to say what they're doing didn't follow the traditional and case law related to how you would properly sanction in a proportional way, presumably, bad acts on the floor of the House. Now, they're not bad acts, but how the majority would sanction anything. So the third one is due process, and the last one is this Article 4, Section 4 guarantee, which is quite novel, actually. It's the idea that we are all guaranteed Republican government, and that, as in little r Republican government, and they've denied that right to her. Interestingly, all of this is now being adjudicated by a different judge, but let's just stop with the merits for a minute. It looks to me, now there are arguments on both sides of everything all the time, but it looks to me like there isn't another situation that has occurred nationally that is even vaguely close to this. There is a Tennessee case in which a majority in a legislature expelled two members, and probably it appears that they expelled them. It's ironic because it was in that case Republicans doing the expelling, and they expelled two black members for speaking out of turn. And I think they were both restored. There are a couple of other state by state examples, one in Montana, one in Florida, in which speech has been silenced by a government official, and either through a 1983 action or something similar, they have restored that party whose rights were taken away from them, have restored the rights to that party. So the big picture on this is you have four claims all saying, I need to get my speech back. My constituents need to get their representative back. And we have a right under Section 1983 to get those rights back again. So on the front end, that's the merits. I completely agree, and I think that every Republican, and frankly most Democrats, should also agree, because it could be that in 26 the Republicans have the majority, and they should want to have equal treatment under the law, just as they deserve to owe that to Republicans. The other thing I'm going to just quickly jump to, Chuck, if I may, is this very peculiar recusal order. I have never seen
Yeah.
anything like this. You know what I'm talking about.
Yep.
The sitting judge, Lance Walker, who, by the way, is a very good judge and a very conservative judge by reputation and by opinion, someone who, by the way, had bipartisan support when he got on the bench. This federal judge issued an order, I think today, saying that all six judges in the district would be recusing themselves from this case. Well, you have to ask yourself, is it that they all have transgender children? Is it they all have someone in the school system? Why would they do that? It's not clear why they would do that. I think the reason they're probably doing it is because they don't want a perception of lack of they don't want to be perceived as being partial. That is, they want to preserve some sense of impartiality. There is an old case called Baker v. Carr. All the lawyers know it, listening to this. And it says basically you can't get yourself too entwined in politics. If you can stay out of it, stay out of it. So the perception I have is that they are trying to stay out of something that is very divisive in the state of Maine, and they have shifted it off to a judge in Rhode Island. Now, the funny part of this is that they're doing it under a statute, 28 USC 636F, and it says that you can do this. You can recuse. I've never seen all the judges in a district recuse themselves overnight, but it says that a judge can recuse, and that pull a different judge into the district, and that judge will adjudicate the matter. The funny part, so they're going to pull in a Rhode Island judge. The funny part is that that provision, and again, you can look it up, 28 USC 636F, it says that there are three things the judge has to do if you're going to hand a case off and you're just, kind of like you're going to duck and like the guy behind you catch the ball. Okay. There are three things you have to do. You have to provide a reason for doing that. In order to justify the emergency, you have to provide a duration under which you will be seeking to have jurisdiction transferred. And finally, you have to provide, it's a reason, a duration, oh, and the duties under Section A to C. So they do provide what the duties are to adjudicate the case. They do not provide a duration. So how long does this judge have to sit there in place of the Maine District? I don't know. And they don't provide a reason, which is really fascinating to me. I mean, I talked with several senior attorneys in the state today, and nobody can really quite tell you why they're recusing themselves. You don't recuse yourself unless you have a personal interest in a case, or there might be a perception that you're not going to be impartial. So I really don't know what'll happen. I will say it's certainly interesting. There are cases around the country that are similar to this, but not exactly the same. And I would tell you that just from what I can see, the equities are with the plaintiffs, and I do not see how you can defend taking someone's First Amendment rights away, declining to give them equal protection and due process, and then this fourth really interesting claim, the idea that a Republican government is guaranteed, and that is essentially being denied, but when a legislator cannot speak out. And again, I would encourage people also to look at this case, Bond v. Floyd, 1966, which isn't in the brief, but it really does validate what Representative Libby is seeking to do here, together with the other plaintiffs.
Yeah, well, it's interesting you mentioned that one because I'm not an expert, and my googling and using AI abilities do not are not verified law. But I did do a little bit of research yesterday just to figure out, has it ever happened that somebody has been taken, a legislator had lost their ability to vote on behalf of their constituents, and the only one that came up was that 1966 case that you mentioned, where it was deemed to be unconstitutional to do that. And it just seems like, too, like the exact nature, it seems to me that the problem that Fecteau has on like officially is that she used we'll go, I just want to briefly go to like the claims of like what she supposedly
Sure.
did wrong, which which they're not necessarily claiming that she was wrong to have free speech and say what she said on social media. Where they say she went wrong, I think, is because she posted a picture of a child for quote unquote political gain, right? And like, I don't like, number one, is that like that, it seems like every politician does that, right? So like, it doesn't seem like even that claim, which is what it looks like to me, holds any
So
water.
just to interrupt you there
Yeah.
briefly, or to jump back in again, how many ads have you ever seen with presidents and or members of Congress or the Senate with children around them on National Do This for the Children Day? Well, that's using children's images. And how many times have you seen a politician walk into a crowd? And the other part about this, and I did read the factual predicate for the case, and this is not a picture that had not an individual that was otherwise unidentified. So, I think it is a test case. I mean, I will say it looks to me like a terrible stretch on the part of the Democrats. It seems legally unjustified. It also seems really draconian. I mean, we try to keep our any sanctions that are taken by any legislative body are supposed to be proportionate. And even as I mentioned, the United States Congress, supported by the Supreme Court, by the way, has only ever taken away the right to speak for one day. They take down the words, they take that right for a day. It immediately is restored the next day. If it were not restored, then all the equities that are articulated in this case, everything that they're saying, would flow. You'd be able to take away due process, equal protection, and free speech if you had the majority, right? All I have to do is
Right.
say, I don't like, Chuck, what you did, and a majority vote, and I silence you forever. Well, so how about if on day one we say, we don't like the way the Republicans as a caucus have approached us today, so they're all silent. We're sanctioning them all, and they're all going to be made silent for the duration of the session. Well, that'd be a very clever way to run business. So obviously, it's never. I personally don't think this case. To me, it's not even a hard case. It's something under Section 1983 where she should get the injunction quickly. But I guess we'll have to see. As you said a moment ago, I have not researched the Rhode Island judge to which this was transferred, so I do not know anything about that judge.
Yeah, like I said, I saw a quick thing on the Maine Wire. They had posted a video of, I think it was the senator. I think he's a Senator Kennedy who was interviewing her. I think probably when she was going through her confirmation and citing an interview she had done when she was a student. I think when she was a student, it was at a coffee shop anyway, where she claimed that she was going through her Marxist phase. In the argument, she claims that what she was actually saying is that she was in school and she was studying ideologies, and the ideology that she was studying was Marxism. But obviously, I think we're a bit skeptical there. Maybe that's what was happening, but either way, it'll be interesting to see how she handles it. I mean, at some level, it seems to me that like it is an infringement unless you have like a more, especially given the nature of what she is supposed to have done wrong, right? Which again, as we've said, is something that like um, basically every politician does. When you go to run for politics, how you do it is you go around, shaking hands and kissing babies, they say, right? Which is clear that you're using, you kind of be really nice to people's kids so that they like you, right? This is part of the tactic. So everybody uses kids, and they even use images of kids, as you said. They go to events where kids are there. They even sometimes tell kids stories, right? So like this is something that almost all politicians do,
But
including
let's do a
yeah,
little time out here for a minute.
sure, yeah,
You know, minors have situations in which they are brought to public attention. For example, at the recent joint session, a boy that was battling cancer, and his parent, obviously brought him to the session. He was recognized by the president. You had another young man who had applied to West Point, recognized by the president. If you have a situation in which someone has brought themselves to public attention, it would seem to me that swallows that overwhelms or displaces any argument that that individual shouldn't be brought to public attention. And in this instance, just like in the past, very often for good purposes, by the way, examples are made of a child or a minor facing something. So maybe when the Americans with Disabilities Act was being passed, you had situations in which minors were identified who had disabilities. And when we were seeking civil rights tied back to the race issues, you had actually very significantly, even Norman Rockwell characterized. There's a famous picture of a girl having to be escorted to schools. So the argument that is on the other side of this, now personally, I think it's the civil rights of the girls that are being displaced here, biological girls. But the argument they're making on the other side is that you have some civil right here under the Maine Human Rights Act, which is actually again overwhelmed by or superseded by or essentially is the Maine Human Rights Act falls to the supremacy clause under Title IX. So actually, I think legally, 50 years of precedent say that the Maine law can't hold up. But their argument is that it's a civil right, and they're using this individual was identified previously as a representative of a group whose civil rights needed to be respected. That's their argument. Now, again, that's their argument. So, how do you have it both ways? You want to allow them to be publicly identified if it supports you, but not allow them to be publicly identified if it doesn't. And I would go one step further and say, really, the reason that the president right now, I mean, let's go to the bigger issue, Title
yeah,
IX, and the fact that the state
yep,
of Maine is not following federal law. Okay, for 50 years, since 1972, federal law has been clear that girls and boys are biological girls and boys. That was the intent of Title IX, to protect women and girls in the educational and ultimately the hiring environment. When you distort that law, you're fundamentally trying to distort 50 years of Supreme Court cases. Now add to that there was a case on January 9th of this year, and before Trump ever became president, and you can look it up, called Tennessee v. Cardona. And it makes clear that the Biden redefinition is unconstitutional, arbitrary and capricious, and that it was done by an exceeding of the authority that the Department of Education had. So they threw it out. Okay. Now comes Donald Trump, who does nothing more than say, look, we got 50 years of precedent, and we got recent precedent throwing out this crazy idea that we're going to redefine boys and girls as whatever we want to define them as. No, that doesn't work. I'm doing an executive order that says males are males and females are females. Those are the three bodies of law that are at work here, and why ultimately Title IX, when the president says follow the law or we will follow the rest of the law, which is that there's a consequence, you're going to lose your education funding if you don't follow federal law. This is exactly the same argument that was used when states in the South did not want to follow civil rights law to entitle blacks to the same rights that whites had. So what you're doing is you're using longstanding precedent to say girls have a civil right to be treated equally, not to be put in dangerous situations, not to be have their privacy intruded upon, and obviously to have their dignity. This is it's pretty straightforward. So on the merits, honestly, Chuck, I think the Democrats have it wrong 7 ways from Sunday, and I think they're doubling down on an untruth, and in the end, it's going to come back and snap back, and it's gonna bite them.
Well, you would have to think so. I mean, that's the thing that kind of blows my mind about this. I understand ideologically they've been drifting in this direction for a long period of time, but are they not noticing which way the wind is blowing? Are they not? Because or do they just have there's two different directions that I think that this could be, or maybe a combination. Which one is that they just think they have such a lock on power here in the state of Maine that no matter what
Yep.
they do, they will not lose in 2026.
All right, so
And
let's talk
yeah,
about that. I don't
yeah,
know that they're even thinking about 26. I think they
okay,
think arrogance is a remarkable thing, Chuck. And when you see it in people who are in a position of authority, it burns you up because you serve the people. The people don't serve you. Okay. And what we're witnessing here is an extraordinary amount of hubris, an extraordinary amount of arrogance on the part of. I don't even think they're thinking about 26. I think what they're thinking is we're in control. We control the governorship. We control both chambers, and we control even a lot of the local positions. So even though by a fraction in many cases, so while we can step on you, we're gonna step on you. And I think the other piece of this. And this is the part that is almost like the idea of cognitive dissonance, where you can hold two contradictory ideas at the same time. On the one hand, I think they think that they are um, on the one hand, they want to acknowledge that the law exists and has its path. How can you not acknowledge that Supreme Court precedent exists, right? On the other
right,
hand, ideology is a blinding force, and
mm,
particularly Marxist ideology. It's a blinding force. And
yeah,
so what happens is if enough people say the sun rises in the west and sets in the east, and you're part of the club that says that, and you have the authority to dictate that, well, then I guess that the sun rises for you. The sun rises in the west and sets in the east. For all the rest of us, it rises in the east and it sets in the west. And here's the problem: the Democrats, Chuck, are so out of. You mentioned 26, and that's where this is
yeah,
going. They are so out of sync with the average Mainer that the governor is embarrassing us down in Washington. This governor,
yep.
who, by the way, profited from Title IX. This governor who got into law school because of Title IX, who got her first jobs because, and she makes a big deal of it, that, she was the first woman to do this and the first woman to do that. How ironic. She's probably got her governorship because of Title IX, but she's now going to take that away from Maine girls and women. So what's happening is the hypocrisy of the Democrat Party in the state of Maine on national stage is being shown to just be an embarrassment. And your question is really, when do they wake up? And the answer is, I don't know when they wake up. I actually think that the Democrat Party is going to split apart at some point. I think that those who are Truman, JFK, traditional Democrats are going to say, I have had enough of this woke garbage. And I may not join I may not join the Republicans, but I am not going to be part of this progressive, leftist, Marxist woke business anymore. And I guess, the other part of the party, and we'll see what happens. The people they nominate in 26, they may go hard left. You just never know.
Yeah, it's really hard to tell, but it seems like, again, either they think that they have no fear that they could ever lose power because they've controlled Maine basically for most of the last 40 years, and then the other side of it is that I wonder if they're between a rock and a hard place because of the promises that they've made. Again, like they're in like the super, if you look at your most of your like really the base of the Democrat Party at this point, they've bought into all this ideology, and this is part of the problem with their ideology for them is that they believe, for instance, I go to these school board meetings, and Bobby Idaho made the comment that Democrats have been using kids as props at school board meetings around the state for a lot recently. So that people are definitely using that, but like I think that their base is so into the weeds on this, and when they look at the issue of transgenderism, they believe they've gotten to this place where so many of the people that are in that category believe that like one of the worst harms that you could possibly cause in the world is to misgender someone, right? And if you, again, if you're in this ideology, if you say that this boy is not cannot compete as a girl, it's the same as saying he's not a girl.
Yeah,
And
well,
so for them, like this is the ideology that they've preached, and that most of their hardcore base believes. And so I feel like they're partially stuck, and I think there is some hubris, as you mentioned. Their pride and who they think they are is part of it, especially with Janet. I mean that came out very clear in her conversation with Trump, and in a number of other things. But probably this is part of what's going on with Fecteau. But I think it's
you
also
know,
their base is so ideologically bought into this idea that for them to back down, it would be seen as cowardice. And they
so
definitely can't do
let
that
me,
when they have power.
yeah. Let me comment on both of those thoughts, Chuck, because I mean this is exactly the kind of conversation that Mainers, to the extent they want to waste their time on this, should in fact be having with each other. First of all, what you're seeing, this notion of backing down, is really premised on the idea that people have so much pride they can't back down, and hypocrisy will not be recognized as hypocrisy just like in the days of the pharaohs, right? I mean, they have pushed themselves so far in the direction of thinking they're right, even if they know they're wrong, that they can't back out. Okay. Now, the truth is, you can always back out. And before I comment on this idea of everybody believing this in their constituency, I will say that if you go back to the Constitutional Convention, one of the most remarkable things about Madison's notes, and if you don't want to burrow through all of his notes or rifle through them, then you can read a book called Miracle in Philadelphia that was kind of a consolidation of them in the 1960s. Beautiful book, easy to read. And what it shows you is that at no time did any, and they didn't like each other, a lot of them, at no time did any member of the Constitutional Convention criticize another member for changing their mind. Now, remember, this is the Constitutional Convention that is taking 60 proposed amendments and boiling them down to our 10 amendments that we call our Bill of Rights. A lot of wrangling in there, right? And but at no time did any member criticize.
Nope.
Sorry about that. At no
That's
time
right.
did any member criticize another. Are you there, Chuck?
Yep. You're good.
No, I
Yep.
lost you. Chuck?
Nope.
Chuck,
I can hear
are you
you.
there?
I can hear you.
Hello?
Sorry about this, everyone. But for whatever reason, he can't hear me. I can hear him. We'll have him join back in just a moment, and keep going. But all right, looks like here he is. We'll try
Okay,
that
here I am
again.
again.
Yeah,
So let me
no
just kind of
worries.
tighten that down before we get to the concept of what the people think. The Constitutional Convention was quite remarkable because what it did is people were debating in order to get to truth. And so if you're really looking for truth, you're willing to back down on a something that you've had some pride in, and you just have to say, okay, I got to eat a little crow because maybe the Second Amendment really does need to be in the Constitution. Maybe the First Amendment really does belong in the Constitution. And so the concept here is that I think first issue is that the Democrats have got themselves so deep in a hole that the pride is really keeping them from doing the right thing. The second part of this is, what does their constituency really think? And I'm going to differ with you a little bit, Chuck. I think that if you scratch the surface, if you scratch the moss off the rock, you'll find that most people actually do still believe boys are boys and girls are girls, even in the Democrat world. They just don't want to admit it because the battle lines have been drawn, and they at the more community level now have a neighbor that they've had an argument with, and they can't back down. So the
Well,
truth is, yeah,
I think they both do and don't. You talked about cognitive dissonance before. We're also
yeah.
talking about the 2+2=5 party. So I think that their constituents both are in favor of this, and they recognize, again, they're in this place where they recognize obviously this is unfair to the girls, but at the same time, if I actually believe that, because I think there's a significant portion of the Democrat base, I think is more than 50%, that do believe that you might be a different gender than your biological sex. The data from at least from 2024 from some polling suggested that Democrats,
So,
that more than 50% of Democrats believe that. So if you believe that, so I think they're dealing with both of these things, and I think they
so you
know
have
that
two
they're
different.
mutually
Remember,
exclusive, but they're, yeah. Go ahead. Yeah.
so remember, you have two different things going on here. The first is the fact underneath the surface, the medical fact. The second is the effect on girls of
Yeah.
so you know somehow the Democrats have walked away from the last 30 years, 20 years of medical literature that says that gender dysphoria is a mental health issue. Okay, just like just like claustrophobia or any of the other situations that are mental health issues. They've completely disowned. I'm telling you, go back to JAMA, go back to the all the medical literature. There was all this discussion about how this was something that was a mental health issue. Now it's been converted to something completely different. Put all of that to the side. Let's not debate that right now. Let's go back to the effect on girls. Whether that's true or not true, the effect of girls, and I have a daughter, the effect of girls having to have boys who, again, I encourage people to just do the real research on the joints of girls are different. The whole proportionality of their bone structure is different. There are literally about 40 or 50 non-trivial differences in the physiology of girls and boys. That is why if you put boys I played football, okay? If you put girls into that same environment, more girls are going to get hurt, okay? And so that's true of all the sports. And then put aside the physical injury part. What happens to the self-esteem? I thought Democrats were all about self-esteem. What happens to the self-esteem of a girl? And my daughter was a captain of a cross-country team in high school, who's a runner who puts her heart into running. I was on a cross-country team. It hurts, okay? It's a tough sport. She's competing against girls. She wins among all the girls, but now a boy who says he's a girl because he has a few more hormones, even though his body structure is exactly the same, his chromosomes are all boy, not girl. He steps in and takes the trophy away from the girl. You don't tell me that doesn't have an effect on self-esteem. Then go to the showers. Under what circumstances should
Yeah.
my daughter ever have to shower?
Yeah.
By the way, 15 years ago, that was a felony. Okay.
Yep.
You go into a girl's locker room and take a shower while they're in there, that's a felony. Okay. Not anymore. Now it's something permissive, and somebody's gonna be in trouble if they don't let that happen. And then finally you go to dignity. Let's just privacy, dignity. Aren't we trying to get, I mean, why do you think things like STEM are pushed so hard? Science and math, engineering for
Yep.
girls. We're trying to elevate. By the way, that was perfectly consistent with Title IX. We're trying to
Right.
elevate
Absolutely.
people's, again, I'll just use the word self-esteem. It gets overused by Democrats, but we want everybody to be their best possible self with the gifts that God has given them. And when you disadvantage one group of people, this is where the equal protection argument also comes up. When you disadvantage one group of people, whatever that group is, because you say they have to be subject to a kind of a physical and a privacy and a dignity incursion, it's unconstitutional. And at the end of the day, this is why, at the end of the day, Trump is right, the courts are right, and the courts have been right since 1972.
Yeah, I mean, again, it's so interesting because everything that you said there, is absolutely is absolutely right, and I think one of the things I'll comment on, like this idea of their being unwilling to change their minds, is one of my quote. It's a quote from the movie about Winston Churchill called Darkness. What was it? No, my
The Darkest Day. I
the
don't know.
darkest hour, yeah.
Darkest Hour.
And he makes the comment at the end, because he changed his mind on something, and somebody's like, you changed your mind, and he says, those who don't change their minds don't change anything. And so this idea of needing to back down is like, it's silly. I get that there's this like negativity in politics around somebody who quote unquote flip flops, but that's really citing somebody
Though, Chuck, honestly,
who's
what
being
we're
a
talking
liar,
about,
is what we're talking about in those situations, not
you
somebody
know,
who really
yeah.
changes their mind.
Though, Chuck, if you think about it, this is just human nature. You're at the Christmas dinner, your siblings take one position, you take another, they point out that you're really not right, and then you have to say, ah, okay, I was wrong. That's a lot of people have a
Yeah.
hard time saying I was wrong. Okay. I mean, it's not just in politics. So, but what we're looking at here is if you are vested with the public trust, you are vested with the public trust since our Constitution's founding to serve the truth. Okay. You're supposed to have integrity. You're supposed to be willing to listen and to learn from those around you. If I were in any public service position, and I've been in a number of them in all three branches of government, and somebody brought to me something that pointed out I was truly wrong, my obligation to you, Chuck, is to say, I'm wrong. Okay. Colin Powell went before the UN and made a mistake. Okay, he didn't intend to make a mistake, but he did, and he had to come back and say, "I was wrong." Okay, I have been corrected. So our best public servants, and every Democrat could do this. In fact, their caucus or their conference doesn't break apart because they would prefer, the ends justify the means. They would prefer to hang together instead of have individuals recognize the truth of it. Do you really believe that every member of the Democrat caucus in the Maine legislature, of which 52% are women, actually don't believe women are women and men are men? I think they probably do.
Yeah.
And I actually even believe that the governor, in the quiet of the night, knows that she was given advantages because of Title IX, because she was a biological female, and she's willing. They're all willing to saw that branch off.
Oh, might have lost you again. Oh, challenges with technology. Yeah, I think the Democrats are definitely willing to
With you again.
do some crazy things. All right, you're back.
Sorry.
That's right.
Anyway, the short of it is, I think we get wrapped up in our own um, perspectives on the world, and Winston Churchill, because you raised him. One of my favorite quotes by him is that it takes courage to stand up and speak, and it takes courage to sit down and listen. And we've kind of lost that second courage. And I'd like to believe that at least the Republicans are trying. And I'd encourage Democrats to try, because wouldn't it be interesting to see a few Democrats say, you know what, on this issue, we break from the conference. And
Yeah.
it's like an ice flow. Once you break, the whole thing comes apart. And I think the truth is, we know boys are boys and girls are girls.
No, we do, and I honestly, one of my thoughts in the back of my mind for a number of years, and I'm starting to say it a little bit louder, is like I feel like one of the mistakes we've made as a Republican Party, and before I even say that, I'll just say, like, I'm not a partisan guy, right? Before I ran for office, I was unenrolled. I was only enrolled for a brief period of time prior to, like, back when Trump was running the first time. I actually enrolled initially intending to vote for Ben Carson in the primaries. Instead, I voted for Ted Cruz. Then I was enrolled in the party for a little while, and then I went back to being unenrolled because I don't like saying that I'm attaching my name to a party, because the party doesn't do everything that I agree with. I'm not 100% in agreement with them. When I ran for office, I became a Republican, but I'm not tied to republicanism. I'm tied to truth and doing what's in the
Yes.
best interest of the people. And so
There you
for
go.
me, I would love to see at this point a Democrat Party that was more in line with truth. I don't want like the Democrat Party to destroy themselves. I think actually a two-party system has some benefits. There's a lot of people that want many more parties. I think within the parties you have like these separate factions, and so maybe it's a little less clear, but you essentially have a lot of the same things that you would have if you had more parties. But ultimately, the point being is like I'm not somebody who's a one-party person who thinks I wish that Republicans would take over
Yeah.
and rule everything, because there's so much potential and tyranny on that side, especially if you have gang mentality. And so like what I want to see is I would love to see the Democrat Party reform, because we all know what is truth. And but one of the things that I think is a winning issue that we haven't focused on enough is this issue. I'm really glad it got brought to the public square. A lot of people have had a lot of
Reality
thoughts
is,
about this and have been
you know,
working on it.
yeah.
And now it's in center stage, but we should have been pushing this earlier, in my opinion.
Well, I think, sometimes the other side makes a mistake and it brings everything to the surface. And I
Yeah.
will say that this is part of a much larger problem, and it is the way in which the education system has been perverted. It's been completely upended, okay? So by way of example, I went to school with Michael Burnham, who is now the head of this Principals Association that has sided with Mills on all this stuff, under the so-called Maine human rights law, instead of the traditional and 50 years of precedent under federal law and the supremacy clause as it relates to Title IX. Having said that, the principles, I mean, we seem to have, I don't know what the reason for this is, other than we've taken our eye off the ball. We used to have 4 years of science, 4 years of math. Everybody knew how to read. Everybody had read a few classics. You might have a foreign language. Everybody had to have 1 year of Maine history. At this moment, 70% of all of the state's fourth graders cannot read to level. Okay, that's huge. Okay, and we are
Terrible.
number 49 or 50. Some people want to say, based on different measures, it's 36, but reality is we're way at the bottom. And for years, when I was going through elementary school and high school in Maine,
Yep.
we were at the top. We were actually in the top five. A couple of times we were the top in the nation. Okay, so
Yep.
what we've done now, we're letting kids graduate from high school with 11 credits. They don't have all the science, they don't have the math, they don't have the reading, they don't have any of the depth. And we've taken industrial arts out, we've taken the shop, we used to call it, out of. So you wanted to learn how to weld, you wanted to learn how to build a house, you wanted to learn how to work under the hood of a car. All that we could do as high schoolers in Maine, and we could do it right in our high school. What we've done is we have taken away the training for the trades, we've taken away the training for good jobs. And what happens, it creates an environment in which kids aren't trained. Employers who need well-trained kids or graduates are not getting them. And then the flip side is businesses start to leave the state. So, you either have a virtuous circle or a vicious cycle. If you put things on the right track, and this gender business is just part of it, you put it on the right track, you rebuild the economy, you rebuild all the basics and public safety, by the way, because people aren't doing drugs. You do on the other side, you're going to get the vicious, and it continues to reinforce itself. So like dominoes that either tip one way or the other. We in Maine, I think, and Chuck, you could correct me on this, but I think Mainers are sick of this. I think they are ready to revolt. And I think 2026 could be the big red run.
I hope so. Like before we wrap up, I do have a couple things on that. Like it's only going to be that way if we, the people, go out and have conversations with people. I think that
Yeah.
but the potential is there. But guess what? Mainstream media, they're
No.
not reporting. Like if they're reporting this, all they're reporting, it's kind of like if you look at Doge, they're
Yeah.
saying they're focused on the things that the people are losing their jobs and their concerns about Elon Musk's power. They're not
Yeah.
talking about all the corruption that is being discovered, because that doesn't help their narrative, right? And so the
Yeah.
people who are watching that, they're not getting that.
Yeah.
Here in the state of Maine, they're not talking about the fact that these girls are being disadvantaged for the most part. They're just focusing on how awful and evil and horrible Laura Libby is for posting that picture
Yeah.
because it
So
has the boy.
Laura Libby is, I think, on the right side of history, and
Yep.
so are all the Republicans with her, and so are
Yep.
all the plaintiffs with her. I will add that, part of what you're describing, you know, they're not reporting on anything, Chuck. So, we have I hate to tell you this, but one party government always creates waste and has the potential for fraud. And we're not, we ought to have a Doge for Maine. I mean, we
We
honestly are in
we
a
need one.
position, we need to
Yeah.
upend every rock and look underneath it. And I ask you the question, how can we have had a $6.8 billion budget, 6.8 7 years ago, and we now have an 11.7? Did the
Yeah.
state double when we weren't looking? What exactly happened? The answer is the Democrats started to spend tons of money. Reminds me of Reagan. He would say that the Democrats, if it moves, they tax it. If it keeps moving, they regulate it. And if it stops moving, they subsidize it. Well, that's exactly what's going on in this state. And until you cut those that waste and that fraud out of the system, our taxes are going to continue to go up. We're at what, number three, number four in the country right now. And trust
Yeah.
me, with a $450 million deficit, with $120 million overrun that they just voted on, and possibly now having to pick up because of this stupid position of the governor, maybe having to pick up $360 million in federal aid that isn't coming in. All that's going to fall back on us as taxpayers. Okay,
Yeah.
that's almost $1 billion that the Democrats have wasted on things that it makes no sense to have wasted them on. So we got to stop thinking,
Yeah.
they're not accountable, Chuck. That's what's really, we have an accountability crisis at the federal level, and Trump is trying to fix it. And we have an accountability crisis right here at the state level that has got to be fixed.
Yeah, absolutely. And if you guys want more, if you're watching and you didn't see the episodes when Jack Ducharme was on, Jack Ducharme I think was on episode 6, so that's going back a ways. And then he was on a couple weeks ago, more recently. So check those out. We do talk a lot about budget because he's on the
Yeah.
finance committee, and kind of explains some of the reason. In the first one, he was on episode 6. He kind of gets into some of the nitty gritty of like why the budget keeps going up, and so if you want to look into some of that, I would highly recommend it. It's finance, so it's kind of boring, but at the same time, it's really interesting. So I definitely would have you take a look at that. And if you're one of those people that's out there, maybe you're one of the main girl dads, and you're wondering what you can do this weekend. We do have the Girl First event, which Bobby, I believe you're speaking at as well, right?
Yes. Yep.
Yep. So a Girl First event to support protecting women in sports, which obviously is part of what we're talking about today. That's what this is all about. Even though they want to make it about something else, it's about protecting girls in sports. So that's going to be a really cool event, and I'm really excited. I probably mentioned this on here before, but Chloe Cole is she's probably one of the leading voices, if not the leading voice, in the detransition movement here in the United States, as somebody who had initially transitioned, I believe double mastectomy, all that kind of stuff, hormones at like age 14 or something like that. But by age 17, she realized this was not her, and she started detransitioning. And so she is coming. She's going to be one of the featured speakers. This is a really unique opportunity to have this national voice come in and talk to this local issue. So I highly recommend. Hope you guys can come. And Bobby, I don't know if you had anything you wanted to share about that too.
I just want to do a shout out, really. And I'm going to speak as a Republican, but as a conservative, we often find reasons to divide on ourselves because I'm
Yep.
more interested in this and you're more interested in that, and then we get kind of wrapped up in the thing we're interested in, maybe Second Amendment rights, maybe free speech, maybe vaccines, maybe something else. I just want to do a shout out here because I think we are very unified as a party on
Yep.
this and three or four other issues. And I think one of the things we have to realize is that Laura Libby's doing a great job. The people, all the speakers that are going to be at this event on Saturday are doing a great job. I don't say, I'm not saying we can't do better at unity, but
Agreed.
we're on the side of the angels, okay? And sometimes you have to just say, up is up and down is down, and we're in favor of up because that's the right answer, okay? And we need to empower girls. And I encourage every Democrat looking at this to ask yourself quietly tonight, would it not be a good idea to empower girls? Maybe you have a daughter, maybe you have a sister, maybe your mother was a beneficiary of these, maybe you were a beneficiary of these rights. Is it even possible that it could be right to take these rights away from girls and put them in a position where they are endangered, and their dignity and their privacy and their rights, constitutional rights, are being essentially taken away from them. I'm a dad of a girl, and I will just tell you, I'm a fighter for the right, and I applaud all those who are going to be at that rally, and I applaud all the Republicans who are standing up together to defend rights that are common sense.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for saying that. I really we definitely need to be more unified as a party, but like we are in terms of principle and what we're working on, and so
Yes.
that's the most important thing to focus on. The other thing that I want to point out, because it's not in the flyers, is that there are actually a number of young student athletes and girls from across the state. It's not this is really not meant to be a political event, even though a lot of the speakers have political ties that are ones on the flyer, but there are actually a lot of student athletes from here in the state of Maine that are going to be speaking. So it's going to be a really a cool event. Hopefully, people can show up and join us for that rally and in defense of protecting women's sports. So yeah. So anyway, thank you for coming on, Bobby. I think that this was really important thing for us to get some information out there to the people about how crazy it is that this is happening and kind of the legal precedent, and just understanding how in the world they think they're going to get away with this. And, hopefully it gets resolved soon. But time will tell. I imagine if it doesn't get resolved quickly enough at the district level, it could be appealed to the Supreme Court. Is that right? I guess that'll be my last question before we close out.
Yeah, I'm going to suggest that it probably will be resolved quickly. They've identified the reason for the recusal as an emergency under one of these provisions, and I think if I am a Rhode Island judge, even if I don't like the case, I think probably because every day that goes on, so to enjoin something, you have to look to see if it's more likely that you would prevail on the merits, if there's irreparable harm from not acting, and on the equities, which way does it tip? Well, every day that constituents in the state of Maine do not have a representative in the form of Laura Libby able to speak and vote on the floor is potential for irreparable harm. So if I'm that judge, I'm going to move as quick as I can to enjoin this and get her speaking rights back.
Well, let's hope that's the case, and it would be nice if some Democrats and especially Democrat lawmakers would come around. But you at home, you can help. Reach out to your representative if you're in one of the districts, and tell them that they need to get their house in order because they're not doing what they need to be doing, and get involved in some way to be able to help the cause. So thank you all. There will be probably some shorts about this. That's another way that you can help, is sharing some of those as Bobby explains exactly what's going on and how wrong they are. Thank you all and have a great night.
Thank you very much, Chuck.